I'd like to start asking you all just to think back, not too far. December 2009. Who can remember that 192 governments came together in Copenhagen to negotiate a follow-up treaty to the Kyoto Protocol? Still vivid memories? Good. There were another about estimated 45,000 participants coming or converging in that town and trying to put pressure on governments to take action with regards to combating climate change. I think it took about 2 full years to organize COP15. And personally, I think what came out of it was a huge disappointment. We're left with no commitment and no plan as how we collectively decide or want to go forward about dealing with CO2 emissions. Now, it wasn't for the lack of effort, and it wasn't for the lack of prioritization, and it was certainly not for the lack of need, but I think we failed because of a deeply flawed decision-making process. Now, this is just one example I'm giving you. I could give you many more to illustrate what I think is we're having real troubles when it comes to addressing systemic challenges, which are some of the most dangerous ones we're having today. And the trouble is that these systemic challenges cannot go undealt with because I think in one way or the other, they put our people and our planet at risk. Let me tell you what I think one of the underlying problems is. In many ways, we have seen more change over the past few decades than we've probably seen since the Middle Ages. And some of the trends since 1950 literally have increased at a rate unseen so far. And just to mention a few, water use, we heard about the extinction of species, the number of people on this planet, the number of cars on this planet, the growth of consumption, and GDP. Now, if you let these trends interact with one another, and you add rapid technological innovation, you end up with a hell of a lot of complexity. And I think that as the rate of change has been increasing exponentially, so has complexity. Now, if you contrast those two developments on the top and contrast it with the line below, which is the ability of us to respond to complex challenges, then I think that line at the bottom has increased at best incrementally. So, there's a problem. The problem is that there's a widening gap between the rate of change, the complexity found in our environment, and our ability to respond to it. And this is based on an analysis that there's a limit to how each one of us, or how much each one of us, in terms of complexity, can process. How many times you scratch your head and you sat in front of a problem and go like, oh my God, I can't wrap my mind around this. So I think we have to reach that limit some time ago. For that reason, I believe that it is time that we have to learn how we help one another to deal with systemic complex challenges. So I believe it is time that we have to redesign our decision-making processes, and I think it's time to re-engineer how we interact with one another. So enough of the bad news. Here's the good news. I think there are many processes out there that are much better suited to deal with complex systemic challenges than the ones we're using so far. And I believe, out of work that I've done in the past, the design process is one of them. There's a few characteristics about the design process, and I think many of you might know about design process, but coming from product, service, or communications design, I am talking about using the design process as a tool to guide social interaction. So, one of the most important characteristics of the design process is that it allows for collaboration. It allows, for example, us here to come together, collaborate, and rapidly address complex issues. The design process is anticipatory. It means it tries to foresee what might come at us and helps us to foresee unintended consequences or weak signals. This is based on the fact that when you deal with a complex issue, you cannot pre-impose answers. So you have to have a process that lets the solution emerge. And a design process can do that. I think the design process is also about decisions and actions fall into place quite naturally. And I think this is hugely important in a world where we tend to have many fragmented efforts. So when you take individual actions at the end of such a process, the design process ensures that these actions are integrated and coordinated with one another, guided by a common intent. Design thinking in general is comprehensive. So when groups come together and work, they think in whole systems. How does the whole system impact the piece I'm working on? And how does the piece that I'm working on, maybe the one puzzle of the solution, how does it impact the whole? And that allows groups to be very deliberate about the actions they're taking because they consider, first of all, the wider context. We don't have time here to go into the inner workings of a design process. And there's a big literature out there. I could show you many, many models. But I'd rather like to take the time given to me here to highlight the other element. I think the second element, which is really important when it comes to closing complexity gap. So that element comes in the form of a person, which is called a process facilitator and designer. It is a person, could be anybody in here, who helps others to make it easy for them to accomplish what they set out to do. You can imagine that a process facilitator takes a group, helps them, guides them through a collaborative process, making sure that at the end you come to a well-considered, iterated decision. So, enabled to do that, a process facilitator has to be very good at creating a neutral space and allows people to collaborate with one another. An important skill for that is that a process facilitator has to be impartial and not committed to a very specific outcome. So in a nutshell, a process facilitator is someone who enables positive change. And often he or she does that by almost guiding people with an invisible hand. So he or she goes often unnoticed. I believe that the design process and this emerging profession of a process facilitator and designer are two important elements to close the complexity gap. Now you might say, hang on a second. You're all for collaboration, right? We all like collaboration. But reality tells a slightly different story. And I know collaboration is difficult, at times impossible. So you might argue that the leaders of this world will not change the way they interact with one another. You might argue by showing me pictures of, for example, the UN General Assembly or UN Security Council, that people come up, give a speech, and another speech, and another speech, and another speech, and you wonder whoa, how will we ever get to a decision that effectively deals with the problems we're having around us? So you might argue, giant auditoriums where people fall asleep in the very back rows, supersized boardroom tables for those of us who work at corporations. You might argue that narrow self-interests, political or economic short-sightedness, or simply customs and protocols cannot be done away with. Now, I believe we can do away with all of that, and here's why. In 2005, I was invited by the World Economic Forum to be part of a team to redesign the way the world's foremost leaders that participate in these meetings interact with one another. For you, important to know is that the forum wanted to innovate because they realized that the standard ways of conferencing, the standard ways of meeting one another were totally inadequate to deal with the issues that were on the so-called global agenda, which are most all of them are systemic and complex by nature. So those of us who were involved in 2005 founded what was called the Value Web. It's a non-profit association of process designers and facilitators. And the Value Web has as an aim to deliver collaborative engagements around the world. We were given the unique opportunity to co-design and co-facilitate with the World Economic Forum over the past 5 years, around 130 collaborative sessions. We had a throughput of about, in total, 7,000 people, meaning that each session had between 30 and 300 of the world's foremost leaders, and these sessions lasted from 2 hours all the way up to 3 days. Now, first message, we got really hopeful. Really hopeful. Because the leaders of this world can work differently with one another. They can hear one another. They can consider options. They can play with ideas. Just let them. And the last part of what I would like to share with you is I'd like to show you some of the results in a shift paper. And the shift that I'm describing is how participants' behavior changed due to the introduction of the design process or the usage of the design process. So the very first one is a shift from get away from our addiction to quick fixes and go to a place where it is allowed to play with ideas, make haste slowly, take time to consider the wider context before you make decisions. It pays off in the long run. Another shift is that instead of sharing issues, towards fixing problems. So what we did in these meetings is just we threw a challenge into the room and asked everyone's help to solve it. Another shift is that instead of just, and I'm doing that, right? I'm just exclusively working on your hearing sense. Use multiple senses. This one is about one-way communication. We've done away with one-way communication. So we've done away with someone coming up on stage and saying, here's how we fix the world. And we introduced feedback loops. Feedback loops basically allow everyone in the room to get feedback from everyone else, which allows for challenging assumptions and truly co-design solutions. We moved from just sending strong signals. No, I'm sending you a strong signal. You hear my voice, I'm loud and clear, towards, here's the popular cause guy making an advertising campaign for his or her cause. Introducing space and time for conversation about issues that normally are not talked about, the things that are written between the lines. Another shift is that instead of focusing in these sessions, in these collaborative sessions, in the here and now, we asked the groups to collectively step into the future. As a group, imagine how a positive future could look like. Because once you've done that, once you have a collective vision of what the future could look like, you can come back to the day and ask the group, what are the actions we need to take today to enable and make that future happen? We went away from a specifications culture to a prototyping culture. And specification is like, okay, here's the specs. I just want that. Towards a prototyping culture, whereas, the user, the beneficiary is at the core. And through an ongoing dialogue about, here's the solution, the user tests it, gives feedback, and incorporates it again into the idea and redesign the solutions become much more robust and better. Now, coming towards the end, we stopped reinforcing the leader, but rather celebrated the power and possibilities of a community. I think this, for me, sums it up. We stopped highlighting or celebrating the individual brilliance, like that person who's all-knowing and kind of knows what to do, towards what we call bringing group genius alive. Group genius, for me, is the ability for groups like these to come together and seek and put into action solutions to complex systemic challenges. What I just told you, these ideas have taken a generation or maybe more to mature. And my message to you is to take these ideas forward, improve on them, and apply them at a scale that truly matters to the planet. To sum it all up, I think if we want to close the complexity gap, meaning increase our ability to deal with complex systemic challenges, we have to fundamentally rethink our decision-making processes. I think we have a design process that seems to do much better, and I hope and this is kind of my call out. I hope there's many more people stepping up to the role in the emerging profession of process design and facilitation. I hope you all join me and collaborate all a bit more with one another instead of fracture competition, and help, therefore, accelerate the making of a fitter world. So I hope you join me in creating a future by design and not default. Thank you very much.